Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. Detective Jordan Carter adjusted his rearview mirror as he pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of the neighborhood convenience store. It had been a grueling 14-hour shift, the kind of day that left every muscle in his body aching and his mind yearning for a break. The December air was biting, and the faint smell of rain lingered in the atmosphere. Pulling his red hoodie over his head, he stepped out of his unmarked sedan. He just wanted a bottle of water and perhaps a small snack before heading home. Across the street, Officer Nathan Blake sat in his cruiser, parked strategically under the shadow of a large oak tree. He had been following up on reports of a string of burglaries in the area. The description of the suspect had been vague, a tall black male wearing dark clothing. The details were as nebulous as the mist rolling off the pavement, but the image had imprinted in Nathan's mind like an unshakable silhouette. Nathan's eyes narrowed as Jordan entered the store. A man in a hoodie, walking with confidence. To Nathan, it seemed too coincidental. His heartbeat quickened as adrenaline flooded his system. He reached for the radio to call in the sighting but hesitated. "If this is our guy, I want to take care of it myself," he thought. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Inside the store, Jordan greeted the cashier with a tired smile. He grabbed a bottle of water and a protein bar, sliding them across the counter. His mind was still on a troubling case from earlier that day, a missing child whose parents had begged him to find their daughter. Jordan's dedication to justice was why he wore the badge, but the constant exposure to pain and tragedy weighed heavily on his heart. As Jordan stepped out into the cold night air, his instincts tingled. A faint glint of headlights reflected off a nearby window, and he noticed a shadow shifting near the parked car across the street. Years of training and experience had honed his situational awareness, and he could sense something was off. Nathan, meanwhile, had already exited his cruiser, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. His heart pounded as he watched Jordan walk down the block. Every step the man took seemed to amplify Nathan's suspicion. He called out, his voice sharp and authoritative, "Stop right there. Hands where I can see them." The words sliced through the still night like a blade. Jordan froze, his heart sinking. He turned slowly, his hands rising instinctively. His training kicked in: stay calm, de-escalate, comply. His voice was steady but firm as he spoke. "Officer, is there a problem?" Nathan stepped closer, his posture rigid. The tension between the two men was palpable, and the faint glow of smartphones being raised in the distance signaled that the confrontation was already becoming a spectacle. "Turn around slowly," Nathan commanded, ignoring Jordan's question. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Jordan complied, his movements deliberate. "Look," he began, his tone measured, "I don't know what you think is going on, but I'm not your guy." Nathan's eyes flicked to Jordan's hoodie and then to the bulge under his jacket, a shape that could easily be a weapon. He reached for his radio, his voice urgent. "Possible suspect spotted. Male, approximately 6 feet, black, wearing a red hoodie. Potential concealed weapon." The word suspect stung Jordan like a slap to the face. He could feel the weight of the onlookers' stares, their whispered conversations, growing louder. He noticed a young woman recording the scene, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "Officer," Jordan said, his voice growing firmer, "I'm a detective with the 18th Precinct. My badge is in my jacket." Nathan's grip on his weapon tightened. "Don't move. Keep your hands where I can see them." Jordan exhaled, his breath visible in the cold night air. Slowly, carefully, he tilted his head to the side. "You're making a mistake. Let me show you my badge." Nathan's mind raced. The rational part of him knew he should allow the man to prove his identity, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins blurred his judgment. "Don't reach for anything," he barked, his voice cracking slightly. By now, the crowd had grown, their murmurs a cacophony of concern and anger. A middle-aged man shouted, "He said he's a detective. Let him speak." Another voice chimed in, "This is what happens every time. Same story, different day." Jordan's pulse pounded in his ears. He knew how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. He decided to change his approach. "All right," he said calmly. "I'm not going to reach for anything. But I need you to understand, this is a misunderstanding." Nathan's gaze faltered for a moment. Doubt crept into his mind, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. The standoff felt like an eternity, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Nathan noticed a glint of gold near the hem of Jordan's jacket. The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't a weapon, it was a badge. Before Nathan could process what he had seen, a voice crackled over his radio. "Unit 32, we've got confirmation that the robbery suspect was apprehended 2 blocks west. Stand down." Nathan's face paled as the weight of his actions sank in. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some cheering, others voicing their outrage. Nathan looked at Jordan, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. Jordan took a step forward, his hands still raised. "Do you see it now?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. "This is why it's important to ask questions before jumping to conclusions." Nathan nodded, his shoulders slumping. The gravity of the moment hit him like a tidal wave. He holstered his weapon, his face a mask of shame. Jordan lowered his hands and reached into his jacket, producing his badge. He held it up for Nathan and the crowd to see. The golden shield glimmered under the streetlights, a symbol of authority and integrity. The crowd began to disperse, their phones still recording as they whispered among themselves. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking, "Is he a good guy or a bad guy?" Jordan looked at Nathan, his expression a mixture of empathy and sternness. "We all have a responsibility to do better," he said quietly. "Think about that." As Jordan turned to walk away, the weight of the encounter lingered in the air. For both men, this was only the beginning of a story that would challenge their perceptions, reshape their values, and ripple far beyond this one cold night. The drive home was heavy with silence, though the sounds of the city buzzed faintly through the windows. Jordan replayed the encounter over and over in his mind. Every detail, every word, every raised voice, it all carved itself into his memory. The sharp sting of humiliation lingered, and though he had kept his composure in the moment, the weight of it was beginning to press down on him. He had dealt with prejudice before, but being profiled by someone from his own profession stung deeper than anything he'd experienced outside the badge. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, and he glanced at the screen to see a missed call from his partner, Detective Mia Larson. Mia was the one person in his precinct who truly understood him, who listened, supported, and stood by him through every challenge. Jordan considered calling her back, but decided against it. He wasn't ready to talk about what had just happened, not yet. By the time Jordan reached his apartment, the city had quieted. The streets were empty, the cold night air thick with the promise of rain. His apartment was modest but comfortable, with a small collection of books lining the shelves and photos of his family scattered across the walls. He dropped his keys onto the counter and sank into the couch, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up to him. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Why had Officer Blake acted the way he did? Was it fear? Bias? Ignorance? Jordan wanted to believe it was something fixable, something rooted in misunderstanding rather than malice. But the look in Blake's eyes, the unwavering certainty that Jordan was guilty of something, was hard to shake. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. This time it was a message, a video link sent by Mia. Beneath it, she had written, "Have you seen this? Call me." Jordan hesitated before clicking the link. As the video loaded, his stomach tightened. It was a recording of his encounter with Officer Blake, filmed by one of the bystanders. The shaky footage showed Jordan standing with his hands raised, his calm voice juxtaposed against Blake's aggressive tone. The video captured every word, every movement, every moment of tension. It had been posted online just hours earlier, and the view count was already in the tens of thousands. The comments beneath the video ranged from supportive to inflammatory. Some praised Jordan for his composure, while others attacked Blake for his actions. But there were also comments that revealed the deeper divide, the ones that dismissed the incident entirely, calling it blown out of proportion or accusing Jordan of playing the victim. Jordan felt a pang of frustration as he scrolled through the responses. The truth of what had happened was so clear to him, yet so easily twisted by others. He called Mia. "You saw it?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Yeah," Jordan replied, rubbing his temples. "It's all over the place." "It's blowing up," Mia said. "The precinct's already been notified. The chief wants to meet with you first thing tomorrow." Jordan sighed. "Great. Just what I need." "Look," Mia continued, her tone softening. "You handled yourself well out there. That video, it's powerful. People are paying attention. Maybe this is an opportunity to make a difference. Or it's an opportunity for everyone to argue about things they don't understand," Jordan muttered. "You've always been about change, Jordan," Mia said. "This is your chance to push for it. Don't let this moment slip away." Jordan appreciated Mia's optimism, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more complicated than she realized. He thanked her and ended the call, his mind still swimming with doubts. The next morning, Jordan arrived at the precinct early, his badge clipped neatly to his belt and his expression carefully neutral. The energy in the building was different, tense, cautious. Conversations hushed as he walked by, and a few colleagues avoided his gaze. It was clear that the video had stirred something within the department, though whether it was embarrassment, anger, or defensiveness, Jordan couldn't tell. He was ushered into the chief's office, where Chief Andrea Morales sat behind her desk, her expression unreadable. She was a seasoned leader, known for her tough but fair approach, and Jordan had always respected her. "Detective Carter," she said, motioning for him to sit. "We need to talk." Jordan nodded, taking a seat across from her. The silence hung in the air for a moment before Morales leaned forward, her hands clasped together. "I've seen the video," she began. "I've also read the preliminary reports from Officer Blake and the other witnesses. It's clear that what happened last night shouldn't have happened. And I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously." Jordan appreciated her directness, but he wasn't sure where this conversation was going. "I'm not looking for an apology," he said. "I'm looking for accountability. This isn't just about me, it's about a system that allows things like this to keep happening." Morales nodded. "I understand that, and I agree. That's why we're launching a formal investigation into the incident. But I need you to know that this is going to be a difficult process. There will be backlash, both from within and outside the department." "I'm not afraid of backlash," Jordan replied. "I'm afraid of nothing changing." Morales leaned back in her chair, studying him for a moment. "You've always been one of my best detectives," she said. "Your record speaks for itself. But this is uncharted territory. If we're going to address this properly, it's going to take more than just an investigation. It's going to take leadership." Jordan frowned, unsure of what she meant. "I want you to lead a task force," Morales continued. "A team dedicated to addressing bias within the department and improving our relationship with the community. You've experienced firsthand what needs to change, and I believe you're the right person to start that change." Jordan was taken aback. The idea was ambitious, and while it aligned with his values, it was also a massive undertaking. "That's a lot to consider," he said carefully. "I know," Morales said. "And I don't expect an answer right away. But think about it. This is an opportunity to turn something painful into something meaningful." Jordan left the meeting with a whirlwind of thoughts. The idea of leading a task force was both daunting and inspiring. He wanted to make a difference, but he also knew the challenges he would face: resistance from colleagues, skepticism from the public, and the personal toll it would take. As he walked through the precinct, he passed Officer Blake in the hallway. Their eyes met briefly, and Jordan could see the guilt written all over Blake's face. For a moment, he considered saying something, but he decided against it. This wasn't the time or place. That evening, Jordan returned home and found himself scrolling through the video again. The comments had multiplied, and the debate had grown fiercer. He closed his laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling once more. Mia's words echoed in his mind, "This is your chance to push for change." For the first time since the encounter, Jordan felt a flicker of hope. Change wouldn't come easily, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was within reach. Jordan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, the cool tile underfoot grounding him as he stared at his reflection. The night's events played back in his mind like a film reel stuck on repeat, every detail etched vividly. The thought of leading a task force weighed on him, and he wasn't sure if the responsibility felt like an honor or a burden. He knew the stakes were high. Change wasn't just necessary, it was overdue. But was he the right person to carry that torch? Doubt gnawed at him like a slow-burning fire. The next morning, Jordan decided to step out of his routine. Instead of driving to the precinct, he took a walk through the community he'd sworn to protect. The neighborhood was alive with its usual hustle, children playing basketball in the street, elderly men chatting on stoops, and the smell of fresh bread wafting from a corner bakery. Yet, there was a tension in the air, a subtle wariness that Jordan had learned to recognize over his years on the force. He stopped at the bakery, ordering a coffee and a bagel. The cashier, a young woman with kind eyes, hesitated as she handed him his change. "You're the detective from the video, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jordan nodded. "Yeah, that's me." The woman glanced around before leaning in slightly. "What you did out there, keeping your cool like that, it meant a lot. People are talking about it." "Talking about what?" Jordan asked, genuinely curious. "About how you handled yourself," she said. "About how you showed grace even when you were being treated unfairly. A lot of us, we don't get to see that. You've given people hope." Jordan thanked her and left, his coffee steaming in the crisp morning air. Hope. It was a powerful word, but it felt fragile in his hands. He couldn't shake the feeling that hope, once ignited, came with a responsibility to nurture it. The task force idea weighed heavier now, not because it felt impossible, but because it felt necessary. When Jordan arrived at the precinct, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Whispers followed him as he made his way to his desk, and colleagues who had once greeted him warmly now offered stiff nods or avoided him altogether. It wasn't overt hostility, it was something subtler, a discomfort born from the spotlight now shining on the department. He ignored it, focusing instead on the mountain of paperwork waiting for him. Midway through the day, Mia appeared at his desk, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "The chief wants an answer," she said. "Are you taking the task force?" Jordan leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "I don't know, Mia. It's a lot to take on." Mia pulled up a chair and sat down across from him. "Listen, I get it. It's a huge responsibility. But if not you, then who? You're the one everyone's looking to right now. You've got the respect of the community, the attention of the department, and, most importantly, the lived experience to make a real difference." "Respect?" Jordan said with a dry laugh. "Have you seen how people are acting around here? Half the department looks like they'd rather I just disappear." "That's fear," Mia said bluntly. "People are afraid of change, even when they know it's for the better. But that doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for." Jordan rubbed his temples. "And Blake? What happens to him in all this? He's a symbol now, whether he likes it or not." Mia hesitated. Blake made a mistake. A big one. But maybe this is an opportunity for him too. If you take this on, you can push for better training, better accountability. You can help make sure something like this doesn't happen again." Jordan nodded slowly. He wasn't convinced, but Mia's words carried weight. He spent the rest of the day mulling over the decision, weighing the potential for progress against the inevitable backlash. By the time his shift ended, he still hadn't made up his mind. That evening, Jordan found himself at a community center where a town hall meeting was being held. Word of the video had spread, and the room was packed with people eager to voice their opinions. Jordan slipped in quietly, sitting near the back. He wasn't there to speak, he just wanted to listen. The meeting was heated. Some community members expressed outrage, demanding immediate action against Officer Blake and others like him. Others spoke more cautiously, emphasizing the need for systemic change rather than individual blame. A local pastor stood up and urged for calm, calling for unity and understanding. Then a young boy, no older than 10, raised his hand. The moderator hesitated but ultimately handed him the microphone. The boy's voice was small but steady as he spoke. "My mom says I should always be polite to the police," he said. "But my dad says I should be careful. I don't understand why it has to be like that. Can't the police just be nice to us?" The room fell silent. The boy's words hung in the air, a poignant reminder of the stakes. Jordan felt a lump form in his throat. The innocence of the boy's question cut through the noise, laying bare the heart of the issue: trust. How could there be safety without trust? After the meeting, Jordan approached the boy and his parents. He crouched down to the boy's level, offering a warm smile. "Hey, kid," he said. "That was a brave thing you did, speaking up like that." The boy nodded, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Are you a cop?" he asked. "I am," Jordan replied. "And I want you to know, not all cops are bad. Most of us want to help. But sometimes, we need people like you to remind us how important it is to be good at our jobs." The boy beamed, and Jordan felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next morning, Jordan walked into Chief Morales's office with a newfound determination. "I'll do it," he said simply. The chief smiled. "I knew you would." The task force was officially announced later that week, and the reaction was immediate. Some praised the move as a step in the right direction, while others dismissed it as performative. Within the department, reactions were mixed. Some officers openly supported Jordan, while others resented what they saw as an attack on their profession. Officer Blake was one of the first to reach out. He requested a private meeting with Jordan, and though Jordan was hesitant, he agreed. When they met in a small conference room, Blake looked nervous, his usual confidence replaced by an almost boyish uncertainty. "I wanted to apologize," he began, "for what happened that night. I made a mistake, and I let my biases get the better of me. I'm sorry." Jordan studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity. "I appreciate that," he said finally. "But an apology isn't enough. You need to do better, not just for me, but for yourself and the people you serve." Blake nodded, his expression earnest. "I want to learn," he said. "I want to be better." Jordan saw an opportunity in Blake's words. "Then join me," he said. "Be part of the task force. Show the community that change is possible, even for people who've made mistakes." Blake hesitated, clearly caught off guard. But after a moment, he nodded. "I'd like that." The decision to include Blake in the task force was controversial, but Jordan stood by it. He believed that true change required bringing everyone to the table, even those who had been part of the problem. As the weeks passed, the task force began to take shape. They held listening sessions with community members, reviewed department policies, and developed new training programs aimed at addressing bias and building trust. Progress was slow, but it was real. For Jordan, the work was exhausting but fulfilling. Every step forward felt like a small victory, a reminder that change was possible. And though there were setbacks and moments of doubt, he kept pushing, fueled by the memory of the young boy at the town hall and the countless others who deserved a better future. One evening, as he walked through the neighborhood, he passed the bakery where the cashier had first recognized him. She waved him over, a warm smile on her face. "You're making a difference," she said simply. Jordan smiled, the weight on his shoulders feeling just a little lighter. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The precinct's conference room was buzzing with voices as Jordan entered, a stack of papers tucked under his arm. It was the first official meeting of the newly formed task force, and he could feel the weight of expectation in the air. Seated around the table were a mix of officers, community leaders, and activists, a group as diverse in opinion as it was in background. At the far end of the table sat Officer Blake, his posture stiff but his face set with determination. Jordan acknowledged him with a brief nod before stepping to the head of the room. "Thank you all for being here," Jordan began, his voice steady but firm. "I know this isn't an easy room to sit in. We're not here because we agree on everything. We're here because we agree on one thing: something has to change." He scanned the room, letting his words sink in. A few people nodded, but the tension was palpable. Jordan set down his papers and gestured toward a large whiteboard on the wall. Written in bold letters were the words, trust, accountability, community. "These three words are the foundation of what we're building," Jordan continued. "Without trust, there's no partnership between the police and the people we serve. Without accountability, there's no integrity in how we operate. And without community, there's no understanding of who we're protecting and why." A hand shot up near the back of the room. It belonged to Maria, a local activist who had been an outspoken critic of the police for years. "Detective Carter," she said, her tone sharp but measured. "How do you plan to rebuild trust when so many of us have lived through years of broken promises and systemic failures? Words are one thing, but action is another." Jordan met her gaze. "You're absolutely right," he said. "Words alone won't cut it. That's why this task force is here, to turn words into action. But I need your help. All of you. This isn't something I can do alone, and it's not something the department can fix without input from the people we serve." Maria crossed her arms, clearly skeptical, but willing to listen. Jordan pressed on. "One of our first steps is transparency. We're implementing a new policy that requires every officer to participate in de-escalation training and cultural competency workshops. These sessions will be mandatory, not optional. We're also setting up a civilian oversight committee to review complaints against officers and ensure accountability." The room erupted into a flurry of reactions. Some people nodded in approval, while others voiced concerns. One officer, a grizzled veteran named Barnes, raised his hand. "Look, I get that things need to change," he said. "But how do you expect us to do our jobs if we're constantly being second-guessed? We're out there risking our lives every day." Jordan nodded, anticipating the question. "I understand where you're coming from, Barnes. No one's saying your job isn't dangerous or important. But the way we approach our work matters. If we're creating fear instead of safety, we're failing. These changes aren't about making your job harder, they're about making it more effective." Barnes didn't look entirely convinced, but he didn't argue further. Jordan took that as a small victory and continued outlining the task force's plans. The discussion lasted for hours, with every point debated and dissected. By the time the meeting ended, there was no clear consensus, but there was something more important: a willingness to keep talking. Afterward, Jordan stayed behind to clean up the room. Blake lingered, clearly wanting to speak but hesitant to approach. Finally, he stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Carter," he began, his voice quiet, "I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to be part of this. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm here to learn. To do better." Jordan set down the marker he was holding and turned to face Blake. "It's not about deserving, Blake. It's about what you do from here on out. We all have room to grow, and that includes me." Blake nodded, his expression earnest. "I won't let you down." Jordan hoped he meant it. As Blake left the room, Jordan took a deep breath, the exhaustion of the day catching up to him. The road ahead was daunting, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of optimism. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The task force held community forums, bringing residents and officers together to share their experiences and concerns. The conversations were raw and often painful, but they were necessary. Jordan facilitated many of these sessions, his calm demeanor helping to keep tensions from boiling over. One night, after a particularly heated forum, Jordan found himself sitting in his car outside a small diner. He hadn't eaten all day, and the smell of greasy burgers and fries was too tempting to resist. As he waited for his order, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert, a follow-up story about the video that had launched him into the spotlight. The article detailed the progress of the task force and included interviews with community members who were cautiously optimistic about the changes being proposed. But it also included criticism from those who felt the efforts were too little, too late. Jordan's name was mentioned repeatedly, both as a figure of hope and as a target for skepticism. He closed the article and stared out the window, the weight of the scrutiny pressing on him. He knew he couldn't please everyone, but the pressure to succeed felt overwhelming. This wasn't just about his career, it was about people's lives, their faith in the system, and their hope for a better future. As he picked at his fries, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the window. He turned to see Maria, the activist from the task force, standing outside. Surprised, he rolled down the window. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, holding up a to-go cup of coffee. Jordan gestured to the passenger seat. "Sure." Maria slid into the car, her expression thoughtful. "I saw you sitting here and figured you could use some company," she said. "You looked tired." Jordan chuckled softly. "That obvious, huh?" Maria smiled faintly. "It's a lot, isn't it? Trying to fix something this broken." "It is," Jordan admitted. "Sometimes it feels like I'm trying to move a mountain with a spoon." Maria nodded, sipping her coffee. "But you're trying. That's more than most people can say." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city filling the space between them. Finally, Maria spoke again. "I wanted to say, I respect what you're doing. I didn't think I would at first. I thought this task force was just another empty gesture. But you've proven me wrong. You care, and it shows." Jordan looked at her, surprised. "That means a lot." "Thank you." Maria shrugged. "Don't let it go to your head," she said with a teasing smile. "There's still a long way to go." Jordan laughed, the sound lightening the heavy atmosphere. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of camaraderie with someone who had once been his fiercest critic. As Maria got out of the car and walked away, Jordan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but he wasn't walking it alone. Change was possible, and he was ready to fight for it, one step at a time. The weeks turned into months, and the task force began making tangible progress. Policies were drafted, community programs were initiated, and a new tone of accountability echoed throughout the department. Yet, for every step forward, there seemed to be an obstacle waiting just around the corner. Resistance from within the precinct was a constant undercurrent, and public skepticism remained high. But Jordan pressed on, fueled by the small victories and the growing coalition of officers and community members who believed in the mission. The media attention had not waned, and Jordan found himself becoming a reluctant figurehead for the movement. He was invited to speak at community events, schools, and even televised forums. While he appreciated the opportunity to amplify the message, the constant spotlight was exhausting. Every word he said was scrutinized, every action dissected. It wasn't just his career on the line, it was his integrity, his reputation, and his ability to lead change in a system that seemed resistant to evolution. One evening, after a particularly long day, Jordan found himself walking through the neighborhood where the confrontation with Officer Blake had occurred. The streetlights cast a warm glow on the pavement, and the hum of the city was softer here, almost peaceful. As he walked, he passed the same corner store where everything had begun. The neon sign flickered faintly, just as it had that night, and he felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with unease. The owner, an older man named Mr. Patel, recognized him immediately and waved him in. "Detective Carter," Mr. Patel said warmly, his accent thick but his words clear. "It's been some time. Please, come in." Jordan hesitated but stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The store hadn't changed, a cluttered mix of shelves stocked with everything from snacks to household goods. "Mr. Patel," Jordan said, nodding. "Good to see you." "You've been on the news," Mr. Patel said, his eyes twinkling with pride. "The whole neighborhood is talking about you. You're doing good work." Jordan smiled faintly. "Trying my best," he replied. "But it's not easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Mr. Patel said, handing Jordan a bottle of water without asking. "That night, when you were here, I didn't realize who you were. I just saw a man, tired after a long day. But now I see more. I see someone fighting for all of us." Jordan felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." As he left the store, Jordan's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Mia. "We've got a problem. Come to the precinct." The sense of calm he had felt moments earlier evaporated as he quickened his pace, his mind racing with possibilities. When he arrived at the precinct, the tension in the air was palpable. Officers gathered in small groups, their voices hushed but urgent. Mia met him at the entrance, her expression grim. "What's going on?" Jordan asked. "It's Blake," Mia said, leading him toward the briefing room. "There's footage of him from a traffic stop earlier today. It's bad." Jordan felt his stomach drop. Inside the room, a monitor displayed a video that had already begun circulating online. In the footage, Blake was seen stopping a young black man for a minor traffic violation. The interaction started calmly but quickly escalated. Blake's tone grew sharp, his body language aggressive. Though no physical violence occurred, the exchange was tense and uncomfortable, with Blake making thinly veiled assumptions about the driver's intentions. The room was silent as the video played, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. When it ended, Jordan turned to Mia. "What's the fallout?" "It's already spreading," she said. "People are calling for his suspension, some for his termination. The community is angry, and the department is on edge." Jordan clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Blake had been making strides, attending every training session, engaging in the forums, and genuinely trying to change. But this video threatened to undo all of that. Worse, it jeopardized the fragile progress the task force had made. "I need to talk to him," Jordan said. Mia nodded. "He's in the locker room." "But Jordan, be careful. He's not in a good place." Jordan found Blake sitting on a bench, his head in his hands. The locker room was empty, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the only sound. Blake looked up as Jordan approached, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "I screwed up," Blake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jordan sat down beside him, the tension between them heavy. "What happened out there?" he asked. Blake exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. The kid, he was nervous, and I thought maybe he had something to hide. I let my instincts take over, and I pushed too hard. I wasn't thinking." "That's not good enough," Jordan said firmly. "You're better than this, Blake. You've been working to change, to prove that you can be part of the solution. But this? This is exactly the kind of behavior we're trying to stop." Blake nodded, his shoulders slumping. I know I messed up. But I don't know how to fix it." Jordan studied him for a long moment. "You start by owning it," he said. "Publicly. You admit what you did wrong, and you commit to doing better. Not for the cameras, not for the department, but for yourself, and for the people you're supposed to protect." Blake looked at him, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "You think that'll be enough?" "It's a start," Jordan said. "But only if you mean it." The following day, Blake stood in front of a room filled with reporters, cameras clicking furiously as he stepped up to the podium. Jordan watched from the back, his arms crossed as he observed the scene. Blake's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone, but his voice was steady as he began. "I want to start by saying I made a mistake," Blake said, his tone measured. The way I handled that traffic stop was wrong. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I failed to treat that young man with the respect he deserved. For that, I am truly sorry." The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. "I've been part of the task force that's working to rebuild trust between the police and the community," Blake continued. "I've been learning, growing, and trying to change. But this incident proves that I still have work to do. I'm committed to doing that work, no matter how hard it is." When he finished, the room erupted in questions, but Blake stepped away from the podium, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Jordan met him outside the room, nodding in approval. "That was the right thing to do," Jordan said. "I hope it makes a difference," Blake replied. "It will," Jordan said. "But it's only the beginning." In the weeks that followed, the incident became a turning point for the task force. It sparked deeper conversations about accountability and the challenges of unlearning ingrained biases. Blake's public apology and commitment to change resonated with some, but drew criticism from others. Still, the work continued. For Jordan, the experience reinforced a lesson he had learned long ago: change was messy, uncomfortable, and slow. But it was also necessary. Each step forward, no matter how small, was a step toward a better future. One evening, as Jordan walked home, he passed a mural painted on the side of a building. It depicted a police officer and a young boy standing side by side, their hands clasped in solidarity. Beneath the image were the words, "Together, we rise." Jordan paused, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The work was far from over, but in that moment, he felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time, he believed that real, lasting change was possible, not because of policies or task forces, but because of people willing to fight for something better. And he was proud to be one of them.